Yo, what's going on, E7 fam? Pat here, back with another video, and this one's going to be pretty long. We're going to be talking about the RGB 5-star selector that Smilegate and Super Creative are giving away for Epic 7's 5th year anniversary. Basically, if you log in a certain number of days, you could choose any 5-star in the game that is either red, green, or blue, hence RGB, assuming it's not limited and it's not a collab character. If you clicked on the video, pretty sure it's because you're looking for some advice on which one to take. I've been playing the game since day one, and I own all of these characters, so hopefully I could kind of impart my knowledge and experience onto you and kind of explain where characters are used, why you'd want to use them, why you'd want to take one over another, things of that nature. At the end of the day, don't really sweat this decision too much. It's not like the Fallen Land selector we talked about yesterday. That one, you might only get 1 to 2 ML 5 stars a year, so you really need to make that one count. This one is, I think, a little bit more lax. With the changes to the story summon in Epic 7, it's pretty easy to get a lot of these characters because you could just kind of choose their side story, bring up their banner whenever you want, and summon for them pretty much whenever you want. So if you're torn between several options, just take the one that you like or the one that is going to help you pretty much closer right now in the short term than, say, something that you might not use for several months. Save those for the story summon. So you want to pick something strong that will probably help you out in the short term. If you're a veteran player and you have most of the people in the game, I highly recommend you take a character that you don't already have as opposed to taking a duplicate for either an alternate build or an imprint. You never know in Epic 7 when a character that's trash gets a rework or a buff and then suddenly becomes meta. It has happened several times throughout the 5 years that this game has been around, so always make sure you're taking a character that you don't own, even if I consider them trash tier. If you only have options between what I consider trash tier, definitely take one of those because, again, you'd never know. That said, let's just jump into the list. I'll try to spend maybe about 30 to 45 seconds on each character to try to keep the runtime of the video down, so bear with me. Our first tier is the already free tier. All 4 of these characters, which is Bomb Model Kanna, Cermia, Sigret, and Vivian, are free to everyone who plays the game. Bomb Model Kanna can be obtained through the game's connections, which is in the lobby after you have cleared episode 2, but before starting episode 3. And then after that, you have Cermia, Sigret, and Vivian, which could all be obtained from the game's expert hunt challenges. If you go into your in-game menu and look at your ongoing missions, you should be able to find these missions. That is where you get these characters. So don't take any of these 4 unless you have, again, everyone in the roster, in which case I don't think you really need my opinion on which character you should end up taking. Moving into the S tier, these are the characters that I think that are the best overall, the ones I think that most people should take. These are the ones I would prioritize higher than everyone else. Do note that in my tiers, it's simply alphabetized. It's not like best character is leftmost, so on and so forth. First one is Destina. Destina is a great general use soul weaver. She does almost everything you could want in support. She has heals for your team. She is probably the second best cleanser in the game for debuffs behind Mediator Kawer. She provides tempo to your team in PvP thanks to her CR push on her skill 2 regen. And then she also has the very rare ability to revive fallen allies. The only thing she doesn't really do is increase the offensive capability in your team. Destina is great in almost every single PvP game mode, and she's also fairly good in a lot of PvE content as well. If you need a support, but you're not really sure which one to take, you could do a lot worse than Destina. She's, again, pretty much great everywhere. There are 2 other Soul Weavers on this list that are very, very good in the S tier as well. So make sure you listen to what I have to say about those 2 before you make your decision in locking it in on Destina. Next up is Iseria, who is a character that I feel like a lot of people should have re-rolled for if you're a newer player. She's one of the goddesses of PvE content. She's pretty much good in almost every single form of PvE content except Adventure, funny enough. She's good in Abyss. She's good in Raids / Labyrinths. She's very, very good also in a lot of various different hunt content. And then obviously she synergizes insanely well with Tamarinne for things like Abyss or even like a Hall of Trials if you're just starting out. Yeah, so Iseria, especially when combined with Tamarinne, is just a powerhouse character because she has the unique ability to reset all the cooldowns on a hero, and she provides defense breaking and buff removal on specific bosses. She's kind of necessary, I feel like, for things like Nightmare, Labyrinth later on in the game. So yeah, definitely a character to pick up if you are serious about trying to clear all the PvE content in the game. After that, we have Peira. Peira is one of the best PvP openers in the game. She's just very good at disrupting the enemy team, removing buffs from the enemy team, and her S3 Pack Hunt gives the very valuable attack buff to your team in PvP. So she's essentially functions as a support because of that, in addition to being a disruptor. And also, she gets stealth and escort, meaning she also functions as a tank. So Peira pretty much does almost everything you could want for a speedy support tank debuff or hybrid. Like, she just does everything in the game, it feels like, except for damage. Her gear threshold is incredibly high, and she's not really used too much outside of PvP. But when it comes to strong PvP characters, she's very, very, very up there, I feel like. She's also, I feel like, significantly easier to gear than Ran, who is the next character that we're going to be talking about. So if you are a slower player for PvP that is looking for a fast character that they could put all of their speed gear on in order to speed contest in PvP, like basically challenge another fast character, Peira is my personal choice because she has such easy gear requirements compared to, like I said, the next character we're going to talk about, which is Ran. Ran is tied for the fastest character in all of Epic 7, and just like Peira, is an incredibly strong speed contester in most PvP game modes. He's also particularly good on Guild War defense, so it's not just World Arena. You can also, I guess, use him in Guild War offense, although I personally don't play that style. His S3 is got the ability to remove buffs from the enemy team, and also provides the insanely powerful defense break debuff, which you can guarantee with his soul burn, and you could set that up by putting mages on his team. So he's a very powerful and potent and consistent opener for anyone who is looking to play aggressively in the game. He also has a little bit of PvE usage, that thanks to the fact that he provides 2-turn immunity. That's very valuable for something like Nightmare Raid. If you're looking for somebody to be able to clear Nightmare Raid for a couple of the fights, he is super useful there. Just excellent damage, obviously fast as all hell. The fact that you could put RNL on him as the artifact and kind of cheese wins. Yeah, just super good character. One of the best, I feel like, in the entire game. Has some defined counters, but when you have everything set up and when it lines up correctly, he kind of feels super broken. I think the only drawback to Ran is that I'd say a good chunk of the player base can't really make this character, bring him out to his fullest potential. He does need really high-end gear, guys and girls, if you're watching this video. He needs super high speed. He needs some kind of damage as well. Good crit chance, good crit damage in order to really take advantage of him. There are a couple of niche builds where you can build him tanky with no damage and a lot less speed, but I don't think they are as effective. So yeah, Ran is somebody that I think you take if you're a veteran player who likes to play fast, has good speed gear, and can really like leverage his strengths. So not one for everyone, but I still got to put him in S tier because of how strong he actually is overall. Speaking of strong, next up, let's talk about Roana, who's the second of the 3 Soul Weavers that are in the S tier. Roana is basically just a really pretty looking girl that just happens to have this insanely broken S2 passive on her called Vigilant Eye. Her S1 and S3 don't really matter. It's literally just the S2 passive Vigilant Eye. This gives your team health as well as combat readiness whenever an enemy uses an extra attack, dual attack, or counter attack, of which there are a lot in Epic 7 in both PvE and PvP. So anytime you fight a boss that has a lot of counter mechanics, a lot of extra attack mechanics, like say, for example, Expedition, some of the Labyrinth bosses, even like Advent she's been able to be used in the past, then yeah, she's going to end up being your girl. And then in PvP, she's great against Navy Captain Landy, who is the current nightmare of the format as of the recording of this video, and then very good against the Bolognas like Lone Crescent Bologna, Seaside Bologna. Basically, if you are well-versed in what you're fighting and you know that they have a lot of counters on their team, a lot of extra attacks, Roana is either a force ban in that PvP scenario, a free win in that Guild War attack, or a free win versus that boss. So that's why she earns S tier, because the passive is just broken, and when it works, it kind of feels like you're cheating at the game. Next up is Tamarinne, who is the PvE goddess, pairs insanely well with Iseria. Her S3 Shining Star turns her into an idol, and when she's in idol mode, she basically does everything. She's got the full cleanse, she's got a CR push, AoE healing, attack buff for your team, guaranteed dual attacks from your hardest hitters. Basically, there's nothing Tamarinne can't really do. Name a PvE game mode, Tamarinne is probably the best character in the game at that game mode, or at least in the conversation. She's just so good everywhere. I cannot fathom a single player in Epic 7 not wanting or not needing Tamarinne. If you don't have her, I think she is the #1 overall choice on this list. Now let's move on to A tier. I think the characters in A tier are very strong, but they're not completely backbreaking like I feel like the ones in S tier are, or they're just not universally amazing everywhere like the ones in S tier. These characters are really strong. I think for a lot of people watching this video, you should probably be taking most of your characters from either S or A. B is kind of like where I draw the line. Once we go below the B rating into like C, D, and trash tiers, those ones you kind of have to have a really, really good reason. The people that I expect to be taking from those tiers, it's largely because you have everyone else above it. But yeah, let's just jump into the A's, starting with good old Auntie Alencia. So Auntie Alencia at one point was the best PvP character in the game, or at least very close to it in Season 1, Season 2. She was an incredibly strong pick. She has her S3 Genesis, which is a full buff strip from the enemy team and provides protection in the form of the very valuable defense buff. She has defense breaks, meaning she can help amp the damage on your team. And recently, and most notably, she is a great holder of the injury set in PvP. She is great versus HP scaling teams that use bruisers such as Apocalypse Robbie, for example. Anything that is scaling off HP, any HP scaling damage dealers, or even like tanks like Yulha, for example. That's kind of Alencia's niche nowadays. She's great versus those things. She's also exceptional on Guild War offense when you pair her with characters like Roana and Destina. A lot of the current Guild War defenses play characters like Senya and Choux, and Alencia is very, very good against both of those characters. So if you're looking for an anti-bruiser character with some PvP applications, I think Alencia is an excellent pickup. Just make sure you can farm the Katie's Hunt so you can give her an injury set. Next up, we can talk about the controversially endowed Aria. She is a very powerful mage in PvP in Epic 7. She's good in Guild War offense in some scenarios. She's good in arena offense. But where she really shines is as a counter pick or a last pick in World Arena versus slow bruiser teams. When she's good, she feels downright broken. Basically, against slower teams that don't have debuffers that can remove her buffs, you're essentially going to use the Umbral Hour, her S3, to funnel all of the damage into her, and she's just going to rain down AoE counters and attacks on the enemy team and clean up in a hurry. When she's good, she feels really good. The biggest problem with Aria is that she gets banned a lot, so you're not going to get too much usage out of her. I feel like this is a character you'll get to use once, I feel like, in like 30 or 40 games, unless you really just try forcing her, which is not something I'd recommend. And the other big drawback to the character is that her gear requirements are just really, really high. I don't want to spend too much time explaining why they are very high. For more information, I highly recommend checking out my How to Play Aria guide that is here on the channel. Next up is Choux, or XDD, or Rat Gaming, as Twitch chat usually calls her. Choux is an incredibly high variance but very powerful tanky bruiser for things like Guild Wars as well as World Arena. She's very hard to kill due to her really high HP pool, the fact that she has built-in crit resist, and she can also give herself immunity, and she also has a built-in counter attack when you have the correct exclusive equipment that just does shenanigans. If you get lucky with counters and extra attack procs on Choux, she can just like 1 or 2 tap a lot of characters in this game, which is why she's so absolutely scary and why people rate her so highly. Not too much else to say about the character. Pretty easy gear requirements, I feel like, for intermediate players to actually achieve, and she puts up pretty solid results in almost every form of PvP. I do have a guide for her on the channel, so feel free to check that out. Next up is Lua, who I put in A tier for the explicit purpose so that newer players who don't listen to my explanations don't see her in S and mistakenly take the character. Make no mistake, Lua should be in S tier. She is arguably the best PvP character in the game, tied with Conqueror Lilias, and in some cases is even better than Conqueror Lilias. Lua is downright broken. Absolutely absurd, and honestly needs a complete nerf or a rework. The character is just ridiculous. Now, you might be asking, if that's true, then why is this character in A and not in S tier? Because if I put her in S tier, people who don't listen to my explanations will pick this character blindly without recognizing the very real drawback that Lua actually has. And that is, this character is pre-banned in around 70% of all PvP games, meaning you are not going to get a lot of mileage at all out of choosing this character. Pretty much, she's going to be relegated to just Guild Wars and regular arena. And if you're looking for a strong Guild War or regular arena character, Lua is certainly at the top of that list. She is definitely that character if you are looking for it. But like with Ran and Peira, she does have a kind of steep gear requirement. You do need really high speed gear in order to get the most out of this character. But if you're trying to take this character for the explicit purpose of taking the best overall PvP character, you might be in for a rude awakening, because the character is, again, like I said, most likely going to stay banned for a long time. And at this point, the players' outcry about Lua is so high, I can't imagine this character not getting nerfed or reworked at some point in the game. The numbers are just absurd. She's banned in 95+% of all games in the World Championship that is currently going around, and the games that she actually makes it through, she has a 100% win rate. There's no way that this character is in any way healthy, and I highly caution that if you want to take this character, that you are well aware of the risks and you are okay with that. Next up, we have Politis, who is basically a staple PvP unit, and that's because of her S2 passive Astral Guide. Basically, she punishes anyone on the enemy team who uses a non-attack skill with an AoE attack, as well as giving her a massive combat readiness push, which she can then use to take the turn, use her S3, basically unbuffable and blind the enemy team, and that gives you all of the tempo in a match. Politis can be built in a variety of different ways. You can build her as a control character with the artifact Abyssal Crown to lock down enemy teams and punish them for ever thinking of using non-attack skills, or you can build her with a metric ton of damage and then essentially just reverse cleave the enemy if they ever use a non-attack skill. Again, staple PvP unit. She's basically been usable from her release until now, and she's had no changes whatsoever. I think she's just going to be one of those evergreen characters because just solid damage, solid utility throughout the whole kit. And she's just incredibly flexible, can be played a number of ways, again, like destruction set or speed set for damage, speed set for the ability to debuff characters, tanky on counter for a control build. There's just a lot of ways the character can be played. And again, if you're serious about PvP, I think she is definitely a character that you need to have in your roster because of how strong that S2 passive actually is. Next up, let's talk about one of my favorite characters to play in the game, in Senya. Senya is an anti-aggression bruiser for Guild Wars as well as World Arena. Her passive gives her 50% critical hit resistance and reflects a portion of non-critical hit damage that she takes back at the attacker. Her S3 gives her a 100% chance to counter after you use it and provokes the enemy team to run into her so that she can counter and keep them provoke locked, essentially keeping a whole team locked down, unable to win the game. If they're very squishy and don't have any cleansers, then that Dragon Slayer strike is basically fatal, and she could just outright 1v4 an entire team. Do note that Senya is a character that requires a specific artifact, which is her own artifact, which is Spear of a New Dawn. If you do not actually have that, then I highly recommend that if you're going to choose Senya, you take that as well in your artifact selector, because without it, her value greatly diminishes. Let's talk about Sharun next, who, like Alencia, is an anti-bruiser / anti-HP scaling character. She is a Soul Weaver that has the Venom debuff built into her basic attack, as well as her S3. Venom is like poison, except it also reduces the maximum health of that character. Her basic skill also can push back the cooldowns of a specific character, making them unable to actually use their ultimate skill. You can essentially keep one character off of their skills for the entire game. As such, she's super well positioned against characters like Mediator Khawer and Apocalypse Ravi, who happen to be two of the most popular characters you see play in almost every single mode of PvP. So she's essentially a counter pick for what is right now the meta. So if you're looking for a strong anti-meta character for World Arena, then Sharun could be that character for you. After that, let's talk about my favorite PvP tank to currently play in Yulha. Yulha's game plan is fairly simple. She wants to soak up damage for your team in most PvP game modes. She achieves this through the Aria's artifact, as well as the redirected provoke on her skill 1. When her HP total gets low, she will use her S2 passive in order to cleanse any debuffs, get a barrier, and a small combat readiness push. At this point, you're in a prime position to use her skill 3 Symphony of Agony. Symphony of Agony deals a percentage of the missing HP that she currently has. So for example, if you have about 25k maximum health and she's currently at around 10k health, you can expect between 13 and 15,000 damage to a target with Symphony of Agony, ignoring damage share. This is particularly good because a lot of the strong DPS in the format don't have high HP totals, such as Savior Auden and Lionheart Cermia, which makes Yulha a primary tank to play against them because she is essentially an out to those characters without having to waste a counterpick DPS slot. After Yulha, let's talk about Zahhak, who is actually a fairly well-rounded character for a fast glass cannon DPS. Zahhak is a counterpick to a lot of things in various different PvP game modes. His S3 has built-in injuries, making him great against HP scaling heroes, just like with Alencia. However, it also has increased accuracy on it, making him great against dodge characters such as Savior Auden and Remnant Violet. His S2 has a built-in cleanse, making him have some support capabilities and makes him also usable in Labyrinth in PvE, so that is some value as well if you're looking for somebody who's not just a PvP character. After that, we have his S1, which is great against teams that pack a lot of debuffs. So he's just a very hard-hitting glass cannon DPS that's good in a lot of scenarios. The only real drawbacks to Zahhak are pretty much the fact that you have to make sure you have turn 1 in order to use him. So things like Conquer Lilias or faster characters might be able to destroy him before he gets a turn. And 2, his gear threshold is kind of high. You do need good speed gear with some damage on it. You do need good penetration gear. And just overall, his speed needs to be decently high in order to have success with him. That said, if you have all of that, he is a fairly good character to have waiting in your wings for a 4th or a 5th pick in World Arena. Pretty good in Guild War offense if you've got the right setup for him. And again, does have that value in Labyrinth for PvE. After Zahhak, let's move into the B tiers, starting with Abigail. Abigail is a PvP character with the goal of protecting a specific character in the backline of your team. Basically, if you have a hard carry that you're trying to protect, if it would die, Abigail keeps it alive at 1 health with immortality for 1 turn, and then gives it the vampirism buff, so that way it can hopefully lifesteal its way back into the game. She kind of gives you a second lease on your team. She also has some utility in the form of a strip, and it has some injuries on it, allowing her to actually be super useful against HP scaling teams like with Alencia or Sharun. And then she does have some minor combat readiness pushing. Overall, Abigail is solid, but she doesn't do anything, I feel like, meta-defining or anything like crazy powerful, which is why it's hard for me to justify her going higher than this. After Abigail comes Arunka, Red's waifu, if you're watching this. Arunka is a anti-barrier specialist in PvP. Basically, if you're fighting against teams that have a lot of barriers, then Arunka's S3, Thrashing in the Prairie, is pretty much the answer. That's kind of what she's designed to do. You can kind of bait people into having barriers with Arunka. So for example, if your opponent has Last Rider Crow in PvP, who is a very common tank as of the recording of this video, you compare Arunka with the free-to-play character Inos 2.0, use her S3 to give Arunka an attack buff and a speed buff, trigger the barrier passive on code 00 on Last Rider Crow, and then Arunka can kind of zoop up there with the speed buff, use Thrashing in the Prairie, kill a specific target, get the reset, and then keep doing it over and over again. She requires some setup, but she is very strong after her buffs. Still, she's just not as universally useful, I feel like, as a lot of the stuff that is in the A tier, which is why I can't really move her higher, but there's no doubt that she is a very strong pocket pick to have in the current state of PvP. Next up is Beehoo, who is actually a little bit hard for me to place because I personally have never played him, but I have played against him, and I've seen a lot of people have success with him. This character might actually even be Secret A tier, I feel like, because the character just overall feels kind of strong. He's reasonably tanky for a mage. He has a strip. He provides some utility to the team, and his burns do significant damage. He has shown up and done decently at the World Championship as well. He's kind of like a damage slash debuffer slash support hybrid. His biggest issue, I feel like, is the same one that like Zahhak has, where if your opponent has the initiative and has turn 1, it's really hard to want to play Beehoo because I feel like he can get shut down and have not really too much game impact. He's more of a bridge when you know you have the initiative, or as an initiator when you know that your opponent is dirt slow. I do think that Beehoo might climb in value, but right now his performance makes me feel like he is a B tier character, and you know, only time will tell. He might actually end up being stronger than I originally think. So if you are keen to pick a character that might have a lot of untapped potential, then Beehoo could be that character. After Beehoo comes another one of my favorite characters in the game, in Celine. Celine is, like Politis, a non-attack skill user. So basically designed to punish characters that use non-attack skills with her passive intuition, which will trigger the very powerful single target attack Blink, which can absolutely just one-shot and destroy a character. It'll then push her up to near the front of the CR bar, where she can use Thunderclap, which is another really strong single target move. So she's designed to just basically destroy 1 or 2 characters on the opposing team if your enemy is foolish enough to press a non-attack skill. Now here's the gripe, the rub with Celine, and why she's not as good as Politis despite being a very similar character. So Celine is a Scorpio zodiac sign for a thief class, meaning that she is incredibly squishy. Unlike Politis, who is blessed with okay HP and very high defense, Celine has good-ish health, but probably the worst defense scorer in the entire game for a 5-star. So no matter how you build her, she's going to feel like she's made of paper. You need to have very, very good gear in order for her to survive, because what good players will do is not press a non-attack skill and just focus fire Celine until she's off the board and then run away with the game. On top of that, there are characters like Ahmed who are very, very strong non-attack skill users as of the recording of this video, and she puts up a skill nullifier on the enemy team, which just basically nullifies Celine's entire game plan, makes Celine have almost no impact. So that's kind of why Celine is down here in B tier. She's hard to use against skilled players, and some of the non-attack skill users that currently exist in the format just really hose her. That said, she's still worth having and worth having geared, because there are times where Celine is just really powerful and outright wins the game by herself. After that is Charlotte. Charlotte is an AoE damage specialist for most forms of PvP, but more specifically as a counter pick to characters in World Arena such as Spectre Tenebria, Navy Captain Landy, and Landy herself. Basically, Charlotte is kind of defined as being the anti-Landy character, I feel like, in this game. Charlotte's biggest hurdle, I feel like, is actually her stats. She's not as tanky as you would expect for a knight, so she can definitely get picked off. Yes, she does have a built-in defense buff when she gets hit, but there are characters in the format such as Unbound Knight Arwell and Mediator Coeric with their S3 and S2s respectively that can strip those buffs and leave Charlotte stranding and feel like she has no actual game impact. When Charlotte's good, she feels damn good, but like I said, there are a lot of characters in the format that can kind of leave her feeling pretty lackluster, which is why I think it's hard for me to justify her being over B tier. Again, though, if you're looking for a strong AoE character, especially against both versions of Landy and Spectre Tenebria, Charlotte can be that character for you. Next up is Command Model Laika, who is an opener much in the same vein as Ran and Peira for aggressive team compositions, although she's not as fast. Command Model Laika has the ability to put the entire enemy team to sleep, which gives you a massive tempo advantage. She has a guaranteed dual attack, which allows you to get some pretty cheeky setups with characters like Vildred. You can kind of use a Laika Vildred cleave or like a Laika Greenlandy cleave. Those are things that you can do with her. That dual attack also is pretty good for PvE content, specifically the Katie's 13 hunt, so that's got some value there. The biggest problem with Laika is that she's got some really rough matchups, some things that really shut her down hard. You have to worry about the fact that all the other openers in the format are faster than her, which is not good for her. And then on top of that, you have characters like Rimuru Tempest, which hard counter her no matter what button she presses, assuming she's on Guiding Light, which is pretty much the best artifact for the character and kind of sort of necessary. You can kind of chance it, but if your opponent takes Zeo and calls your bluff, then again, Laika has some issues. That's pretty much why Laika is in B tier, is because she's not as good as the other openers, and there's definitely a lot of counter picks and counter play to her that really shuts the character down. After Laika, we have Wintenberg waifu Ilynav, one of the coolest looking characters in this entire game, and one with one of the best voice actresses as well. Ilynav is very, very similar to Alencia. She is a PvP specialist that is designed to do combat against HP scaling teams. The rub with Ilynav is that generally I feel like green is a bit better in PvP than red, and Ilynav needs to be built insanely tanky to avoid dying from being focus fired, because she just doesn't have the bulk stats that a character like Alencia has. Still, when Ilynav high rolls and she gets a lot of Elbrus Ritual Sword counters into her S2, she feels unstoppable, and her S2 punish, the soul burn on that thing, hits like an absolute truck. She's definitely one of the more fun characters to play, but you're not going to always have an amazing amount of success there. If you can build this character on Elbrus Ritual Sword, you have an extra one laying around, and you can get her to be really tanky with some decent damage stats, I think you're going to have a lot of fun playing Ilynav. And if you're looking for a character that has the high roll potential, looks cool while doing so, and is a load of fun to play, at least in my opinion, then I definitely recommend picking her up. Next, we have Blue Kise, who is kind of similar to Zahhak in the sense that she's kind of a counter pick. Specifically, you're using her to use her S3 Nocturne to reset specific cooldowns in PvP. Traditionally, it's used for like Little Queen Charlotte. You can essentially go through the immunity with the exclusive equipment and reset the Will of Lemaire. She's also good versus buffed units thanks to her S1. And then she has a cheeky cleave combo with Ahmed, where essentially you can have Kise use Nocturne to get a 100% combat readiness buff thanks to Ahmed's buffs, and then go immediately into Dark Scar for huge damage. So she's got some use cases. She's just not as universally useful, I feel like, as Zahhak is right now. And she's in that same awkward area that Zahhak is, where if your opponent has somebody faster than you, it's really risky to pick the character. You basically have to be confident that your Kise is going to be taken close to turn 1, or you've already got turn 1 locked out with somebody else that can protect Kise and make sure she gets to her turn. Not as many counter picks as Zahhak is the only reason, really, that she's not in A tier, and that's why she's here in B tier. After Kise, we have Red Lilias, who just received an exclusive equipment today as of the recording of this video. Time will tell if that makes this character's value rise. Lilias was recently reworked to be a counter to Lua, although it doesn't really feel like she does a whole heck of a lot in that regard, because people either just play around it or they just ban the character, so Lua still kind of just gets to be broken and do her thing. That said, Lilias is a really fun character to use, and it's not just in PvP. This character actually has a multitude of PvE game uses. She's not the best in Expedition, but you can use her there. She's great in Hall of Trials, very good in Abyss, pretty good in Advent, and again, does have some PvP use cases as an Aureus holder. She's got some pretty cheeky cleave strategies you can use in Guild Wars in combination with her S3, as well as the character Senya if the character has her attack built sky high. So there's a lot of value in this character, because best S1 pretty much in the game. Non-attack skill hating S2 shield, which is kind of decent, but not the greatest. Politis and Celine feel like they do more versus non-attack skill characters. And then she's got a cleanse that does decent damage on the S3. Soul burn on this character is also very good at being an extra turn. If you get a critical mass of souls, Red Lilias can do a lot of work in not only PvP, but PvE. The problem with Lilias is that she just feels too fair in a world where everything is unfair. She does a lot of great things, but she's not the best at anything, and I think that's really what holds her back and makes me want to put her in B tier. But after the exclusive equipment, it is possible for this character, I feel like, to rise to like A tier, for example. After Lilias is Ludwig. I don't have too much experience with Ludwig. Ludwig is a dedicated PvP character for people who want to play the cleave strategy. If you are a dedicated cleave player, a dedicated aggro player, and you have really good gear and you're confident in your ability to boost up Ludwig to protect him, he can definitely be that character that can just absolutely dunk a slow team from orbit because of how high his damage is. That's pretty much all there is to say about Ludwig. If you are a cleave enthusiast and are looking for another strong AoE DPS option, take Ludwig. Next up is the great Mortelix, Mort Daddy, the character that everyone loves, the character that Smilegate did so dirty in the narrative. Mort is actually, I think, pretty good right now. Like, he's not a meme. He's been so bad for so long. He has some pretty interesting counterpick uses in PvP. He can't be stunned, making him kind of decent against certain debuff compositions. With his recent round of changes, he has almost 100% uptime on his critical hit resistance, and it gives him a speed buff now, so he's kind of booking it. His S3 has injury built into it, making him kind of decent against AoE scalers. He's got a guaranteed defense break in the kit. He's reasonably tanky. I think the biggest thing about Mort, the thing that's kind of making me want to not say he's an A tier character right now, is I just don't think the damage is really there, but he does have some pretty like cheeky things, like I said, that make him good into things like Navy Captain Landy. I've seen people play him on like Crown of Glory into Navy Captain Landy, and that really hampers certain team compositions' offensive capabilities. So there's definitely a lot to explore with the character. I think his own artifact is pretty good on him, so if you're looking to pick him up and play him and you have his artifact, it is a pretty good option. Again, this is a character I feel like Lilias, where he could potentially rise to A tier, but I just don't have the data to justify that this character should be A tier as opposed to B tier. But he's definitely viable, I feel like, this season in a lot of PvP game modes. Next up, we have Vildred. Vildred is just a really solid AoE DPS for anyone that likes to play aggro or cleave, specifically cleave. He's also got a fair number of good PvE use cases. You can use him in Labyrinth. He's a great adventure farmer. He's good in Asmanic. He's good in Banshee. And then on top of that, he's got the best team imprint in the entire game in speed. He's one of the few characters in the entire game with the team speed imprint, and it's the highest value one in the game at that. So Vildred, for anyone who's serious about playing aggressively in PvP, is a character you're going to want to have, and you're going to want to have his imprint triple S at some point. Next up, we have Violet. Violet is just a great anti-blue character in PvP, and he has some pretty decent uses in PvE, largely an automaton tower, or for just like tanking boss fights in adventure if you're new to the game and are looking for somebody who can do that. If your opponent picks any blue heavy team compositions, he's almost guaranteed to be a guaranteed answer, since he is a dodge-based character, and green characters naturally have increased miss chance against blue characters, so blue characters can't really do squat to Violet. So if your opponent has a team that's just filled with blue characters, bring Violet. They don't ban it, it's a free win. You see a Guild War defense that has only blue DPS and tanks, Violet is a free win, which is why it's hard for me to justify him going any lower than B, but good players can play around him. There is a lot of anti-dodge in the format currently, which is kind of why I can't justify him going any higher than B as well. After Violet, let's move on to the C tier characters, which I think have one or two really great things going for them, but there's probably something holding them back from going up a bit higher on the list. First off, let's talk about my girl, Cecilia. Cecilia, in my opinion, is the best PvE tank in the entire game. She can do some really cool things in Ancient Inheritance. She's the best expedition tank in the game. She's really strong in Abyss as well as Challenge Abyss. That said, she's not particularly great at PvP. And the thing is, Adventurer Raz is free for everybody who plays the game, and Unbound Knight Arwell is a comparable option that is a 3-star. So choosing your selector on Cecilia means you really want to have to be playing optimally, and I don't think that everyone who plays Epic 7 is looking to play optimally. If you want to be an optimal PvE player, yes, Cecilia is probably the best option for a lot of things because she has the defense break, the strip, the slow, the immunity, the barriers, the provoke. She does quite a lot of things. Just again, no PvP value, and you can get comparable performance even if it is only slightly worse from characters like Raz and Arwell. Next up is Edda here, and Edda used to be a great cleave character, kind of like how Ludwig is up here, but I feel like people have kind of figured her out. She's got, I feel like, more counterplay than Ludwig does right now, and she's not as explosive as Ludwig. I feel like at the higher ranks, it's really hard to cleave with Edda now compared to where it was in the past, which is why I have her value a little bit lower. That said, she still has pretty decent PvE usage because she's one of the best options you can choose for some of the Nightmare Labyrinth fights, so she's got that going for her. But otherwise, she's pretty much just somebody that you're going to pick up if you really like the design and you're looking for an aggressive cleave DPS that does some AoE damage. Next is Elena. Elena is a Soul Weaver who is designed to essentially cleanse debuffs, but it's not the best. And she's also designed to help protect your team versus AoE DPS. And I feel like outside of like Navy Captain Landy lately, not too many dedicated AoE DPS characters. It's like Landy and Lionheart Cermia in the format. Otherwise, it's a lot of single target, in my opinion. And even then, good players can just play around her Sacred Ground passive, not really ever give it to you. And then in that case, the character doesn't really feel like she has too much of an impact. So yeah, it's just, I feel like good players really play around Elena really well. And as far as her like support and cleansing aspects, I just think that there are other characters that do the cleansing job better, even as far as invincibility goes, which her S3 gives. Somebody like Crimson Armin in the tank slot, I feel like is going to do you a bit better. Savior Auden has a team-wide invincibility as well, and is also an insanely good hyper carry for your team. So I just don't really see too much value in Elena. You could definitely make her work, but it's going to require some effort. Speaking of some effort, let's talk about Eligos. I actually think Eligos is still really, really good character. Here's the thing, though. He's not better than Ran or Peira as far as openers go. And he requires the same, if not better, gear than those characters. So if you're going to play Eligos and you have the gear, why would you not just play Ran or Peira? And if you had a second set of gear, why would you also, again, not just play Ran or Peira? So Eligos pretty much just requires you to have like 3 or 4 really insanely good sets of speed gear because he's like the 3rd or 4th best option. Character reads really good on paper, has decent performance, but he just doesn't have the results and the people who can actually bring out his fullest. They're just going to play Ran or Peira or another opener instead with that level of gear. That's kind of what holds this character back. He requires as much as the best characters in the game, but doesn't perform like the best characters in the game. Similar story here with our next character, Flan. Flan is like a souped up version of the 4-star Moonlight character Auxiliary Lots, and I feel like there are other supporters that you can get more value out of. Namely, like Ahmed feels like a better character to set up cleave because it's not as fragile as Flan. Flan is very subject to being blown out by Celine or Politis, for example, with their punishing skills on their non-attacks. So yeah, that's kind of the rub, I feel like, here with Flan. She's just got a lot of counters, requires insane gear, just like with Eligos, to be super effective. So unless you're like a huge fan of this character's design and you have really good gear, it's really hard, I feel like, to get Flan to work. You just have to be a dedicated Flan player, basically, in order to bring out her fullest. She does still have some use cases in Wyvern, though, so if you're looking for somebody who can replace Blue Corinne on some of the Wyvern compositions, Flan can definitely do that for you. You just might need a little bit more gear. Ah, yes, Hua Young is next, the girl whose legs are broken. Hua Young used to be the best damage dealer in the game about a year ago or so, and then Smilegate just nerfed her into oblivion. Nowadays, Hua Young is just a anti-HP scaling unit. So like you see your opponents on Alencia or Apocalypse Robbie and their team is really slow and you've just got this like hyper invested low HP Hua Young on like triple torrent set. You bring her in, she uses her S3, kills the character in one hit, and then she's just useless because they made the S1 and the S2 just garbage on this character now. That's pretty much the only real reason to play Hua Young. You just build her on torrent set. You bring her into your Guild War offense, your Arena offense, your World Arena to kill one specific character with her S3, and then she's useless. Please, Smilegate, this character needs some kind of buff. Maybe don't put her back to where she was in the past, but man, you guys absolutely overkilled this character. Next up is Kuwerik. Kuwerik is very similar to both Zahhak and Blue Kise. I would say he's very similar to Blue Kise. He's in this really weird spot where he's not fast enough to not just get run over by most of the strong openers in the game, but he's at least fast enough to outspeed a lot of the slower characters in the game that see a lot of play. So if you recognize your opponent is very slow, then Kuwerik can absolutely do a lot of work with his resets on his S2. And then he has a really strong AoE S3. But he's way more fragile, I feel like, than Zahhak and even Kise. Because the thing is, like, Zahhak has the invincibility. Kise has the stealth. Kuwerik, he does have stealth as well, but he doesn't get the huge barrier like Kise does. He's just, I feel like, more fragile than both Zahhak and Kise, which is why I find it hard to recommend him over both of those characters. There's just comparable characters, I feel like, that are less fragile, do more than Kuwerik, and don't require as good a gear as Kuwerik, because I feel like Kuwerik requires some very, very premium gear to get the most out of him. Next up is Kairon. Kairon nowadays is primarily a anti-aggro DPS, very much in the same vein as Senya. He's more of an anti-cleave character, if I'm being honest. Basically, if your opponent's team is all glass cannon, you can kind of have a dirt slow Kairon on counter set, and he can hopefully bring it home with his various AoE counters and his ability to extend his immortality with Apocalypse. That's kind of what he's used for nowadays. He also has some use cases in PvE for Red Expedition, although there are better options if you're looking for a Red Expedition DPS. Red Baal and Sezan is a little bit better at the same role. But yeah, Kairon at least has some PvP applications as well as PvE applications. The reason I don't have him higher than C tier is because most of the cleave openers nowadays are blue, and it gets to a point where Kairon can kill everything except like a Flan or an Ahmed, for example, and he has to go through the 50-50 mischance or he just auto dies. So there's just a lot of scenarios where like Kairon can't close a game compared to some of his other contemporaries like Bloodblade Corinne, for example, which is why it's hard for me to justify him going higher than C tier. Next up is Choux. Chou's just a really strong and solid knight. His niche is exactly the same as Yulha, and that's pretty much the problem and why he's in C tier. He has to compete with Adventurer Raz from the free-to-play crowd. Unbound Knight Arwell is probably the best overall mitigation knight, and that's also a free-to-play option. So his only real niche is with his Siegfried attack, which is pretty much exactly the same as Symphony of Agony, and in some cases Symphony of Agony is even better, and it's stapled to a body that I feel like is just overall better than Choux. And that's kind of why he's in C tier. There's just a plethora of really powerful tanks right now in the format, and there's nothing mechanically wrong with Choux. It's just he struggles to differentiate himself from amongst his peers. Next up is Blue Lulika, who is a PvE specialist. She is a jack of all trades, but a master of none. She can be a character for you to farm in Wyvern. She is great in Abyss. She's fairly good in Expeditions. She can just do a lot of work in Advent, good work in Labyrinth. The problem is that never is Lulika the best option. There is always going to be a better option than taking Lulika. And that sucks because I think this character is like really fun to play, and I really like her design and her kit overall. It's a good kit and a fun character. Just, again, she's never the best option for anything. There's always a better option. Epic 7 is a game about choosing the right tool for the right job, and unfortunately, Lulika is never the right tool for the right job. Next up is Mui, who is a debuff/support hybrid for PvP game modes. She has a AoE stun, and she also has an AoE attack buff for your entire team. The problem with Mui is very similar to the same problem that we keep talking about with characters like Kise and Zahhak, and even command model Laika. This is a fast character, but she's not nearly fast enough to be the opener that you need her to be. Debuffers in the current state of Epic 7 need to be the things that are taking the very first turn of the game, because inherent power creep has made it so that openers are also assassins. So yeah, Mui is competing with the likes of Ran, Peira, and again, command model Laika, Conqueror Lilias, all of these things. And that's what really holds her back, because she doesn't have any way to really protect herself, so she might just end up dying if you can't guarantee that you have turn 1. And if you do have turn 1, then odds are you're probably playing one of those stronger debuffers. Not a bad character, just again outclassed by many of her peers. Next up is Pavel. Pavel used to be a premier AoE cleave DPS for PvP, but I feel like that time has passed. He requires absolutely insane quality gear for him to actually function as an AoE DPS still in cleave. If you want to go for that strategy, you're more than welcome to do so. It does have a fair number of counters, such as Bellion, so you will have to be aware of that. Right now, Pavel's best use is as a farmer for Banshee 13. He functions as a fairly good AoE DPS for that hunt, and he is the optimal character to play alongside Straze to have the best version of the Banshee 13 one-shot. Next up is Robbie. Robbie is a strong red bruiser for PvP. The problem is with Robbie is that she is attack scaling as opposed to HP scaling, and right now, bruisers in the game need to be either HP scaling or have some inherent survivability, I feel like, to really succeed. Robbie doesn't really have much of either, aside from the fact that she has some life still in her S1, so if she gets lucky with counters, she could feel pretty good. Her S3, Devil Drive, one of the most insane S3s I feel like in the entire game. AoE defense penetrating move, has a stun with 100% combat range pushback. The problem is, it's just hard to build Robbie and get a lot of value out of her to capitalize on how strong that S3 is. She just feels outclassed and overshadowed by many other bruisers in the game. But if your opponent has a team that is very low damage or has a high concentration of green characters, then Robbie can absolutely be an insane pocket pick for you in World Arena. Next up is formerly Raz's brother, Tywin, before they retconned him before the game came out. Tywin is a anti-control tank, I guess is the best way to summarize it. The character in the backline can't be slept or stunned, and Tywin himself can't be slept or stunned. So if you're playing against a lot of characters that have those kinds of things, then by all means you can pick up Tywin and play him. Other than that, though, he's kind of lackluster as a tank compared to many of his other peers. He's got the same problem as Crow. Yes, you could play Tywin to protect it, but you could also just play like Mediator Coeric and like Unbound Knight Arwell, and it's just generally, I feel like, a lot better. He kind of suffers from the fact that he is a tank that usually needs to be picked early in the draft that protects against stuns and sleeps, which you're probably not seeing until the later part of the draft. So he just, I feel like, tends to be drafted in very awkward scenarios. He can definitely work. I just haven't seen people have too much success with him. Again, I feel like it's because he's outclassed by a lot of other knights that are in the format, including his own ML5 counterpart. Next up is Euphine, who is a very popular character. Euphine used to be an incredibly powerful PvE specialist for things like Expedition, and I believe she still has some meme labyrinth clearing options thanks to her exclusive equipment, which extends the buff durations on her, so you can give her immortality with something like Shooting Star Arcades, and she can keep that forever and get you a ton of ancient coins, so that way you can level up your accessories. That's still a thing you can do with her. But her rework really changed her into being a cleave DPS for teams that have silence. Basically, you pair Euphine with Zio as like a 4th or a 5th pick in a draft when you have him, and hope that she makes it through, so that way she can do her thing and blow up a specific DPS. It's honestly kind of a shame that they decided to rework her in such a way that, yes, she's playable now in PvP, but she's just so insanely niche, and all of the value that this character used to have in PvE is just kind of gone. So she's pretty middling, I feel like, right now. Overall, I really wish they would kind of do something else with her, kind of revert her and make her a bit better. This is probably one of the most buffed characters and reworked characters in Epic 7 history. It feels like they can't really decide what they want to do with Euphine. They could have left her alone and have her be an excellent expedition and hunt character, but instead they just really want this character to be a competitive character in PvP in this game, and I feel like they just keep falling flat every time they do so. Alright, let's move on to D tier. D tier characters have like 1, maybe 2 uses, and they're incredibly niche. This is going to go real fast. There's, like I said, 1 or 2 things that save these characters from being complete trash, but they're pretty close to trash. First up is Baal Sezan. He is the best AoE DPS in the game for the Blooming Snaglich Expedition. If you're not trying to play expeditions optimally to get the solo team that could do 1.8 million damage by yourself without needing the help of friends or, open recruitment, there's no reason to take this character. Next up is Green Bologna. She is pretty good for Asthmatic 13 for the one-shot compositions. She also has some use cases in Nightmare Labyrinth, although I think there are better options for you. Charles is a similar story to Bologna. He is an excellent farmer for one-shot teams for Asthmatic 13, and he can also be used for some compositions for Banshee 13. Chloe is the optimal character for farming Banshee 13 in a one-shot consisting of Straze, Chloe, and Pavel. Urvalin can be used as a single target cleave option if you so choose, although he's pretty outclassed, I feel like, at this point. I feel like there are just better options. You're pretty much playing Urvalin, I feel like, to flex on your opponent. He, I believe, can also still be used as a Banshee 13 one-shot character, but there are better options than him, including a 2-star, so yeah. Next up is Red Ken. Absolutely garbage outside of Ancient Inheritance, where he is the best DPS in the entire game. He is pretty much only for Ancient Inheritance. Lidica is a character that can only be played in a couple of floors in Abyss, where you basically have to CR push back the enemy or you will lose. Outside of those 2 or 3 Abyss floors, she has no use anywhere else in the game. Ray is a cleanser that just happens to be green, making him great for Nightmare Labyrinth's version of Juleeve Council. Other than that, he's basically trash. Red Tenebria is a suitable substitute to Baal Sezan for the Blooming Snaglich composition, and she is one of the best Abyss characters in the entire game when you give her the artifact Abyssal Crown. Outside of those Abyss cases, though, she's nothing special. Finally, let's move on to trash. I'll explain why all these characters are just not good. Araminta is just worse, I feel like, in every conceivable way than Researcher Carrot, and she's also worse than Silverblade Araminta, who I don't even think is particularly that good. Basar isn't total trash, it's just what he does is just outclassed, I feel like, by everybody, and he's not really usable anywhere, so, like, why play him in anything? Haste is a character that keeps getting buffed and reworked like Euphine, but the devs just have no idea what they want to do with him. He's not used anywhere for anything. Lilibet is a decent single target burst warrior in this game that just happens to have extinction. There are other extinction characters that are just more viable. Like, there's no reason to pick Lilibet. She's exactly like her friend Lulika. She's just outclassed everywhere, it feels like, in her role. Melissa is strangely a character that was kind of decent as a cleave option, and then they, like, buffed her, and the buff was actually a nerf, and then she just disappeared. You don't see her played in anything anymore. Sez is a character that was originally the best damage dealer. I say best because, like, originally people said he was the character to pick at the start of Epic 7's lifespan, but very quickly that got dispelled as other damage dealers rose to the forefront. He was decent for a time in Cleave with a combination of Windrider, and then Windrider got reworked, so it didn't really work with him, so he doesn't really have an identity. He got some changes. It doesn't really change anything. Sez desperately needs, like, a rework entirely for his entire kit. And then finally we have Taeyu here, who is another non-attack skill punishing character in the same vein as Celine and Politis. But his non-attack skill punish is pretty much just giving him a buff that makes him actually kind of dangerous. And he doesn't really do anything without that buff, so people just don't press the button and then he's useless. And that's kind of it. Like, his only use is to counter Aria, and good Aria players just kill him and don't press the button. So what does Taeyu even do? So yeah, that's pretty much it. You can see down here now all of the can't choose characters. These are everyone that you cannot choose on the list, just so you can see which ones, in case you were hoping to see a specific character here and it wasn't. It's because it's a limited or a Moonlight 5-star hero. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the RGB 5-star selector. Hopefully this was of some help to you. If you think it'll help out a friend or guildmate, as always, share it out with them. Finally, enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your week, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye now.